They say when you grow old, you begin to love silence, but no one tells you that silence can also break your heart. My name is Alina Grace, and I'm 83 years old, living alone in a small wooden house on the edge of Tennessee. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of birds outside my window, and for a moment, I forget that I'm alone. But then, reality returns, the empty chair across the table, the cold cup of tea no one shares with me anymore. My daughter calls me every night. She says, "Mama, you're fine on your own, you have your memories." And I smile even though those memories are the reason I can't sleep at night. I wasn't always this way. Once this house was full of laughter, of music, of family dinners where love overflowed more than food. Now all that remains are echoes and an old woman trying to find warmth in them. But what if the same memories that once gave you life are now the very reason you can't breathe? I still remember the day we moved into this house, me, my husband Robert, and our little girl Lily. It was springtime. The air smelled like fresh rain, and hope lived in every corner of our hearts. Robert built the porch himself, hammering each nail with dreams of watching Lily play on those steps one day. Back then, life was simple Sunday picnics by the river, warm apple pies cooling by the window, laughter that came easy. I would wake up every morning to the sound of Robert humming while making coffee, and I'd think, this is forever. But forever is a fragile thing. It breaks quietly without warning. One day you wake up and the same house that once held your joy now becomes a museum of everything you've lost. And maybe that's the hardest part, realizing that the place that once felt like home now only reminds you that you're alone. Lily was the light of our lives, the kind of child whose laughter could make the world stop spinning for a moment. She had her father's eyes and my stubborn heart. Every morning before school, she'd come running into our room, her tiny hands holding a messy drawing, shouting, "Look, Mama, it's us." And I'd hang every one of those drawings on the fridge like they were priceless art. Robert used to call her his little sunshine, and truly she was. But sunshine fades too. As she grew older, our once perfect little girl became distant, busy with friends, school, and the world that seemed to pull her away from us. I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd always come back to her mama. But deep down, I could feel the gap growing, one that love alone couldn't fill. Tell me, have you ever watched someone you love drift away, piece by piece, while you pretend everything's still the same? The first real storm in our lives came when Robert lost his job at the factory. It was a quiet, heavy kind of pain, the kind that doesn't scream, but stays inside you like a stone. I remember him sitting on the porch for hours, staring into the distance, pretending he was fine. I tried to comfort him, to remind him that we still had each other. But a man's pride is a fragile thing. And when it breaks, it takes something from the whole family. Bills began to pile up, arguments became frequent, and laughter slowly faded from our home. Lily would hide in her room whenever we fought, clutching her pillow, her eyes filled with questions we didn't have answers for. Those were the days I realized love isn't always enough to keep a family together. Sometimes, survival demands more than the heart can give. And in trying to save the people you love, you sometimes lose yourself along the way. Robert eventually found another job, far away, in another state. He said it was only temporary, that he'd visit every few weeks, that we'd make it work. And for a while, we did. The first few months, he called every night, his voice tired but full of love. But slowly, the calls became shorter, then fewer, and then they stopped altogether. I'd sit by the phone every evening, staring at it, waiting for it to ring. Some nights I'd even pick it up just to make sure it still had a dial tone, just to hear something. Lily would ask, "Mama, is Daddy coming home soon?" And I'd smile, hiding the ache in my chest, saying, "Of course, sweetheart, he's just working hard for us." But deep down, I knew he wasn't coming back. Some stories don't end with words, they end with silence. And that's when I learned the worst kind of goodbye is the one that never gets said. The day the letter came, my hands trembled before I even opened it. Robert had written just a few lines, short, cold, distant. He said he'd found someone else, that he was sorry, but he couldn't come back. I remember the words blurring through my tears, the paper slipping from my hands, and the sound of my heart breaking louder than any thunder outside. I didn't scream, I didn't curse him. I just sat there staring at the porch he built, the same porch where he promised forever. That night I tucked Lily into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Daddy loves you very much," even though I knew he didn't anymore. Because I wanted her to sleep with hope, not heartbreak. I sat by the window till morning, watching the rain wash away the dust, wishing it could do the same to my pain. But how do you wash away a wound that keeps bleeding inside your soul? After Robert left, life became a long, quiet battle. I took up sewing work for neighbors, mending clothes late into the night just to keep the lights on. My fingers would ache, my eyes would blur, but I never stopped because Lily depended on me now. I remember counting coins at the end of each week, trying to stretch every dollar to cover rent and food. Sometimes we'd have nothing but soup for dinner, but I'd still tell her, "We're lucky, baby, we still have each other." And she'd smile, believing me. That smile was my strength, the only reason I didn't collapse under the weight of it all. There were nights when I'd sit by her bed after she fell asleep, brushing her hair gently and whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Because when you're a mother, you don't get the choice to fall apart, you just learn to cry quietly while staying strong. As the years went by, Lily grew into a beautiful, determined young woman, the kind of daughter any mother would be proud of. She studied hard, worked part-time, and promised me that one day, she'd give me everything I deserved. I used to tell her, "You already have, sweetheart, you gave me a reason to live." But success has its price. When she went off to college, the house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. I'd wake up and still make breakfast for two, forgetting she wasn't there anymore. I'd keep her room clean just the way she left it, her favorite books on the shelf, her childhood photos on the wall. Every weekend, I'd sit by the window, waiting for her call, waiting to hear her laugh again. But slowly, her calls became less frequent, first weekly, then monthly. I told myself she was busy, that this was what life was supposed to be. Yet every time the phone rang and it wasn't her, a small piece of me faded away. Tell me, have you ever loved someone so deeply that their silence starts to sound louder than your heartbeat? The first time Lily forgot my birthday, I told myself it was nothing, just a busy day, a missed reminder. But that night when the clock struck 12 and the phone stayed silent, I sat in the dark and whispered, "It's okay, baby, mama understands." I stared at the old photo of us on the mantel, her tiny hands wrapped around my neck, her eyes full of love, and wondered when that love had become so distant. I knew she wasn't a bad daughter. She was just living the life I had once dreamed for her, a life without struggle, without pain. And yet, a small, selfish part of me longed for her to remember me, not out of duty, but out of love. I missed her voice more than I missed my own youth. Because sometimes the greatest pain isn't losing someone, it's being forgotten by the person you gave everything to. Then one winter evening, the phone finally rang. It was Lily. Her voice was calm, polite, almost too polite, like a stranger reading a script. She said, "Mama, I've been thinking it's better if you stay in Tennessee. You have your home, your peace." I didn't understand at first. But then she added softly, "I just think it's time you live alone, Mama. I have my own life now." My hands went cold, my heart sank, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. After everything, the nights I went hungry, the years I spent fighting the world for her, she wanted me to be alone. I didn't argue, I just said, "If that's what makes you happy, sweetheart." When the call ended, I sat there in silence, the weight of her words echoing through the empty house. That night, I realized loneliness isn't when you have no one around, it's when the person you love most stops needing you. And that's when I truly understood, sometimes, love doesn't end with anger, it just quietly fades into distance. Days turned into weeks, and the house felt heavier than ever. The ticking clock, the creaking floorboards, even the wind outside, everything reminded me of absence. I tried keeping myself busy, tending the garden, knitting scarves, baking pies. I had no one to share with. Every corner of this home carried a memory, Lily's laughter echoing down the hallway, Robert's hammer tapping on the porch. But memories can be cruel, they visit when you least expect them and they refuse to leave. Some nights I'd wake up thinking I heard Lily calling, "Mama," only to find myself staring at the empty doorway. I'd sit by the window, clutching my shawl, whispering prayers for her happiness, even if it meant I'd never be part of it again. Because a mother's love doesn't end with distance, it only grows quieter. But how long can a heart keep loving in silence before it forgets what warmth feels like? One morning, I received a package in the mail, a soft pink sweater and a small note that read, "Stay warm, Mama. Love, Lily." My hands trembled as I held it. For a moment, I felt her presence as if she were right beside me again, helping me fold the laundry like she used to. I pressed the sweater to my chest and whispered, "I've been waiting for this, baby." But then I noticed something, the sweater still smelled new, untouched. It wasn't handmade like the ones I used to knit for her. It was bought, impersonal, quick. And that small realization broke something in me. I wasn't angry, just hollow. Because love isn't about grand gestures, it's about the thought, the warmth, the time someone takes to show they care. I hung the sweater in my closet, still wrapped in its packaging, a reminder that sometimes love changes shape, even when the heart doesn't. And that day, I learned that the worst kind of loneliness is when someone remembers you, but not the way they used to. Winter deepened that year, and the nights felt endless. The cold crept into my bones, but it wasn't the kind of cold that blankets could fix. It was the kind that comes from within. I started talking to myself more, whispering little stories about the past, pretending I was telling them to Lily like I used to. I'd laugh at my own jokes, then cry in the same breath. One evening, I set the dinner table for two, out of habit, maybe hope. And as I stared at the empty chair across from me, I thought of all the times it was filled with laughter. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice again, to tell her that I missed her. But I didn't. I didn't want to be a burden. Mothers always say they want their children to be happy, but no one ever asks who makes the mother happy once the children are gone. Tell me, have you ever felt so invisible that even your own love stops noticing you? The first snowfall came quietly that December, white, gentle, almost forgiving. I stood by the window, watching it cover the porch Robert once built, the same porch where Lily took her first steps. Everything looked so peaceful, yet so painfully still. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the fire, the warmth touching my hands but not my heart. I thought about calling Lily again just to hear her voice, even if for a minute. But when I picked up the phone, I hesitated. What would I say? I'm lonely. I miss you. I didn't want her to feel guilty. I wanted her to live freely, to smile without my sadness weighing her down. So I put the phone back, closed my eyes, and whispered to the emptiness, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mama's fine." But sometimes lying to protect someone you love hurts more than the truth ever could. Because some goodbyes aren't spoken out loud, they're lived in silence. Day after day, that winter was harder than most. My body began to slow down, the stairs felt steeper, the nights longer. I'd wake up with aches that no medicine could fix. The doctor said I should have someone around, but I just smiled and said, I have memories. He didn't understand what it means to live alone after a lifetime of giving. Every room in this house still whispered their names, Robert's laughter in the kitchen, Lily's giggles in the hallway. I talked to them sometimes, not out of madness, but out of love that refused to die. When I cooked, I'd still set an extra plate. When I prayed for both of them first. People think loneliness is about being by yourself, but true loneliness is being surrounded by everything that reminds you of those who are gone. And sometimes memories don't keep you company, they keep you awake. One morning, I found an old photo album buried beneath a pile of blankets. The cover was torn, the pages yellowed, but as I opened it, time stood still. There we were, young, smiling, full of dreams. Robert holding baby Lily in his arms, me standing beside them with hope shining in my eyes. I traced their faces with trembling fingers, and for a moment, it felt like they were right there again. I could almost hear Lily's little giggle, Robert's deep voice calling me darlin'. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered, "We were happy once, weren't we?" I realized how life moves on so quietly, one memory at a time, one heartbeat at a time. You don't even notice when the laughter fades into echoes and the people you love become pictures in dusty frames. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't losing people, it's living in a world that still remembers them when they no longer remember you. As spring returned, the world outside began to bloom again, flowers, birds, sunlight. Everything came back to life except me. I would sit on the porch, rocking slowly in my old chair, watching children play across the street. Their laughter reminded me of Lily, of the little girl who once ran into my arms after school, smelling like crayons and sunshine. Sometimes one of the neighborhood kids would wave, and I'd wave back with a smile that barely reached my eyes. People saw an old woman enjoying the weather, but inside I was reliving decades of love, loss, and waiting. I thought about how life gives us so much joy in our youth, only to test us with silence in our old age. Yet somehow, even through the pain, I found peace in knowing I had loved deeply. Because love, no matter how lonely it leaves you, is still the most beautiful thing we ever hold. But tell me, how do you keep living when the reason you lived for has already moved on? One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the Tennessee hills, I sat outside with my cup of tea, the same way Robert used to. The sky burned orange and gold, and for the first time in years I spoke out loud, not to anyone in particular, but to the wind. I said, "Robert, Lily, if you can hear me, I hope you know I did my best." My voice cracked midway and tears rolled freely down my wrinkled cheeks. I had spent so many years trying to be strong, holding back the weight of my loneliness. But that evening, I let it all go. I cried for the young girl who came to America chasing dreams, for the wife who lost her husband too soon, and for the mother whose love was left unanswered. When the last ray of sunlight faded, I whispered, "Maybe love never leaves, it just changes places." And that night, as the stars began to shine, I finally understood some goodbyes are not endings, they're promises waiting to be kept in another lifetime. A few weeks later, Lily finally called again, her voice softer this time, almost trembling. She said, "Mama, I'm sorry, I've been so busy I didn't realize how far I'd drifted." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. For years I had prayed for this, not the apology, but the voice, the connection, the reminder that she still cared. I told her gently, "It's all right, sweetheart. A mother's heart never holds grudges, it just waits." We talked for hours that night about small things, the garden, her work, the weather, but behind every word was something unspoken. Love rediscovered. I didn't tell her how lonely I had been. I didn't want her to feel pain. I just listened, memorizing her laugh again, knowing that maybe this time she wouldn't disappear so easily. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from words, it comes from the silence between them, where love quietly finds its way back. Now, as I sit by the same window where my story began, I realize that life has been both cruel and kind. I've known love so deep it shaped my soul and loneliness so heavy it tested my faith. But through it all, I learned one truth: every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night was worth it because they were all made for love. When people look at me, they see an old woman living alone in a quiet Tennessee town. But inside, I carry 1,000 moments: Robert's laughter, Lily's first cry, and the echo of a home once full of warmth. Maybe I don't have much left in this world, but I have memories that no time can steal. And if you're listening to this, remember, never let distance, pride, or silence take away your chance to love someone fully. Call your parents, hug them, tell them they matter. Because one day you might wish you had. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell someone you love them today before someday becomes too late.